The first time Samuel Fletcher heard Beatrice Ashford sing, he thought an angel had wandered into the saloon and gotten herself terribly lost. He had come down from the mountains surrounding Llano, Texas, in the spring of 1878, his beard thick, and his muscles aching from months of trapping beaver and hunting game in solitude. The small frontier town sat nestled in the hill country, a place where cattlemen and ranchers gathered to trade stories and spend their hard-earned money. Samuel was not a man who enjoyed crowds, but he needed supplies and whiskey in that order. The Golden Horse Saloon was the largest establishment in town, a two-story wooden structure that smelled of tobacco smoke, spilled beer, and unwashed men. He pushed through the batwing doors with shoulders so broad they nearly scraped both sides of the frame, his long dark hair tied back with a leather cord, his buckskin clothing marking him as someone who lived far from civilization. The saloon was packed that Saturday evening, full of cowboys fresh from a cattle drive and townspeople looking for entertainment. Samuel found a spot at the bar, his 6'4" frame towering over most of the other patrons. The bartender, a thin man with a nervous twitch, slid him a glass of whiskey without being asked. Samuel had that effect on people. His face was all hard angles and sun-weathered skin, his eyes a pale blue that seemed to look right through a person. His arms strained against the fabric of his shirt, muscles built from years of chopping wood, hauling animal carcasses, and surviving in conditions that would kill softer men. That was when the piano player started up, and a hush fell over the rowdy crowd. Samuel lifted his eyes from his drink and saw her for the first time. She stood on the small raised platform that served as a stage, wearing a simple blue dress that had been mended several times but was clean and pressed. Her dark hair was pinned up in a style that might have been fashionable in San Antonio or Austin, but here in Llano, it just made her look like she was trying too hard. She was young, maybe 21 or 22, with delicate features and large brown eyes that scanned the crowd nervously. The piano player nodded to her, and she opened her mouth to sing. The first notes came out shaky, her voice trembling with what was clearly stage fright. Some of the drunker cowboys started to laugh, but Samuel found himself leaning forward, his whiskey forgotten. There was something about that tremor in her voice, the way it caught and wavered on the higher notes, that struck him as the most honest sound he had ever heard. She was singing an old folk song about lost love and distant homes, and her voice shook with genuine emotion rather than practiced performance. Most of the men in the saloon did not appreciate her vulnerability. They wanted a brassy saloon girl with a voice to match, someone who could belt out bawdy tunes and flirt with the customers. This girl was clearly not that. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the floorboards, her hands clasped so tightly in front of her that her knuckles were white. But she kept singing, her voice quavering but never quite breaking, and Samuel thought it was the sweetest sound he had ever heard. When she finished, there was scattered applause and more laughter. A few crude comments were shouted from the back of the room. Samuel saw the girl's face flush with humiliation as she hurried off the stage, disappearing through a door behind the bar. The crowd went back to their drinking and card games, already forgetting about her. Samuel tossed back his whiskey and signaled for another. He told himself it was none of his business. He had learned long ago that the world was full of suffering and he could not fix all of it. He was a man of the mountains, more comfortable with silence than conversation, more at home with animals than people. The smart thing to do was buy his supplies in the morning and head back to his cabin in the hills. But an hour later, when he saw the girl leave through the back door of the saloon with tears streaking down her face, he found his feet carrying him outside before his brain could stop them. The night air was cool and smelled of sage and distant rain. The girl was walking quickly down the dark street, her arms wrapped around herself. Samuel followed at a distance, telling himself he just wanted to make sure she got wherever she was going safely. Llano was not a particularly dangerous town, but it was still the frontier, and a young woman alone at night was an invitation for trouble. She turned down a narrow alley between the general store and a boarding house, and Samuel heard her sob catch in her throat. He stopped at the entrance to the alley, uncertain. He was not good with crying women. He was not good with women in general. The last conversation he had with a female who was not selling him supplies had been more than 2 years ago. But then he heard another voice, male and slurred with drink. "Well now, what do we have here? Little songbird looking for somewhere to nest." Samuel was moving before he could think, his long strides eating up the distance. He rounded the corner to see 2 cowboys blocking the girl's path. They were not trying to hurt her yet, just intimidating her, enjoying her fear. The girl had backed up against the wall, her eyes wide. "Lady has somewhere to be," Samuel said, his voice a low rumble. "Best let her pass." The cowboys turned, and Samuel could see the alcohol-fueled bravado drain from their faces as they took in his size. He was not just tall, he was broad across the chest and shoulders in a way that spoke of real strength, not the wiry toughness of men who worked cattle. His hands hung loose at his sides, but there was something in his stance that promised violence if necessary. "Did not mean nothing by it," one of the cowboys muttered, already stepping aside. His companion followed, and they hurried past Samuel, disappearing back toward the main street. Samuel looked at the girl, who was staring at him with a mixture of fear and relief. Up close, he could see that her dress was even more threadbare than he had realized, and there was a fading bruise on her left wrist. "You hurt?" he asked. She shook her head quickly. "No, I am fine." "Thank you for your help." Her voice still shook, even in conversation. Samuel found himself wanting to hear her speak more, just to listen to that tremor. "Those men might circle back. I will walk you home." "That is not necessary. I have imposed on your kindness enough already." Was not asking permission. She bristled slightly at his tone, and Samuel saw spirit flash in those brown eyes. Good. She would need that to survive out here. "I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself, mister. Did not look that way a minute ago." "Because you came charging in like some kind of bear before I had a chance to handle the situation myself." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "And how were you planning to handle 2 drunk cowboys in a dark alley?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then sighed. "Fine. You can walk me home. But only because I am tired and do not want to argue." They walked in silence for several minutes, the girl leading the way through the quiet streets of Llano. The town was small enough that you could cross it in 10 minutes, a collection of wooden buildings and dirt roads carved out of the Texas hill country. In the distance, Samuel could see the dark shapes of the hills that were his home. "My name is Beatrice," the girl said finally. "Beatrice Ashford. Though most people just call me B. Samuel Fletcher. Are you from around here, Mr. Fletcher? I do not recall seeing you before. Live up in the mountains. Come to town maybe 4 times a year for supplies." "Oh, you are a mountain man then. I have heard stories about people like you. Most of them are probably exaggerated. They say mountain men can wrestle bears and survive on nothing but pine bark and creek water. Never wrestled a bear. Shot a few, though, and pine bark tastes like hell." He heard her laugh, a soft sound that was almost as shaky as her singing voice. "That is good to know. I will cross that off my list of things to try." They arrived at a small house on the edge of town, little more than a shack with a sagging porch. Beatrice stopped at the gate, turning to face him. In the moonlight, Samuel could see the exhaustion on her face, the weight she was carrying. "Thank you for walking me home, Mr. Fletcher, and for what you did back there. I am grateful. You should not be walking alone at night." "I do not have much choice. I need the work." "Singing in saloons," she flinched. "I know I am not very good. You do not have to pretend otherwise. I saw you in there. You were the only one who did not laugh. Did not laugh because there was nothing funny about it. You have a nice voice." My voice shakes. I get so nervous in front of people that I can barely get the words out. "So what? Still sounds sweet to me." She stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was mocking her. Samuel held her gaze, his expression serious. He meant what he said. There was something about her vulnerable, trembling voice that cut through all the noise and pretension and went straight to something real. "You are a strange man, Mr. Fletcher," she said finally. "Been told that before. Would you like to come inside for some coffee? It is the least I can do to repay your kindness." Every instinct Samuel had told him to refuse. He did not do well in small spaces, and he especially did not do well with pretty young women who made his chest feel tight. But he heard himself saying, "Coffee would be fine." The inside of the house was as shabby as the exterior, but it was clean and organized. There was a small kitchen area with a wood stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a curtained-off section that he assumed was the sleeping area. Beatrice lit an oil lamp and busied herself making coffee, and Samuel stood awkwardly near the door, unsure where to put himself. "You can sit down," she said, gesturing to the table. "You look like you are about to bolt. Not used to being indoors much." "How long have you been living in the mountains?" 8 years, give or take. That is a long time to be alone. I like the quiet." She poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him at the table. Samuel wrapped his large hands around the tin cup, grateful to have something to do with them. He could feel her watching him, studying him the same way he had studied animal tracks in the snow. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Fletcher, Samuel? And sure. Why did you help me tonight? Most men would not have bothered. Did not like seeing you scared. But you do not even know me." "Does not matter," still did not like it. She smiled, and it transformed her face. Without the fear and exhaustion, she was actually quite beautiful. "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect? Mountain men are supposed to be rough and crude, dangerous." "Am dangerous." "Just not to you." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with something Samuel could not quite name. Beatrice looked down at her coffee, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "I suppose I should be frightened of you. You are rather intimidating. But you are not frightened." "No," she said softly. "No, I am not." They talked for hours that night, long after the coffee pot was empty. Beatrice told him about her life, how she had come to Llano from Louisiana after her father died, leaving her with nothing but debts. She had no other family, no prospects, and precious few skills. Singing in the saloon was the only work she could find that paid enough to keep a roof over her head and food in her belly, even if it meant enduring humiliation night after night. Samuel told her about his life in the mountains, though he left out the reasons he had fled there in the first place. Some wounds were too old and too deep to share with a stranger, even one whose voice made his heart do strange things. He told her about the cabin he had built with his own hands, the seasons he had endured, the animals he had trapped and hunted. He told her about the silence that was so complete sometimes that he could hear his own heartbeat. "That sounds lonely," Beatrice said. "Lonely is different than alone." "Are you lonely?" Samuel considered the question. He had not thought he was, not until tonight. Not until he had heard her shaky voice singing about lost love and seen the tears on her face. "Maybe," he admitted. When he finally stood to leave, the sky was already beginning to lighten with the approach of dawn. Beatrice walked him to the door, and he could see the reluctance in her movements. "Will you be leaving town soon?" she asked. Was planning on heading back up tomorrow. Today, I guess. Oh. She could not hide the disappointment in her voice. Well, it was very nice to meet you, Samuel. I hope you have a safe journey back to your mountains. Samuel stood on the porch, his hat in his hands, and felt something shift inside him. He had been running from people for 8 years, hiding in the wilderness because it was easier than facing the pain of connection. But this girl with her trembling voice had somehow slipped past his defenses in a single night. What if I stayed a few more days? He heard himself say. Could get to know the town better. Been a while since I spent any real time around people. Beatrice's face lit up like a sunrise. I would like that very much. Perhaps you could come hear me sing again tomorrow night, or tonight rather, since it is already morning. I will be there. He walked back to the boarding house where he had left his gear, his mind churning. He told himself he was being a fool, that he was just going to get hurt or hurt her, that he should stick to his original plan and head back to the mountains. But when evening came and he walked into the Golden Horse Saloon, he knew he was not going anywhere. Beatrice was already on stage when he arrived, wearing the same blue dress. Her eyes found him immediately in the crowd, and he saw her shoulders relax slightly. He took the same spot at the bar, ordered the same whiskey, and waited for her to begin. This time when she sang, her voice still shook, but there was less fear in it. She kept her eyes on Samuel as she performed, as if singing just for him, and he found himself mesmerized. The other men in the saloon still did not appreciate her talent, still made their crude jokes and paid more attention to their card games than to her performance. But Samuel listened to every note, every quaver, every catch in her breath, and thought it was perfect. When she finished, he was ready. As she came off the stage, he intercepted the saloon owner, a portly man named Jack Crawford who smelled of cigars and cheap cologne. "Need to talk to you about the girl," Samuel said. Crawford looked up at him warily. Samuel had that effect on men when he wanted to. "What about her?" "How much are you paying her to sing?" "That is between me and her, mountain man, not your concern." Samuel leaned in close, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "I am making it my concern. How much?" $2 a night plus tips. Which there are not many of, seeing as how she scares the customers away with that weak little voice. $4 a night from now on. And if I hear any of your customers giving her trouble, we are going to have a problem. Understand? Crawford opened his mouth to argue, saw the look on Samuel's face, and thought better of it. "Fine, $4, but you are paying the difference. Deal." Samuel walked out of the saloon before Beatrice could see what he had done. He did not want her gratitude or her questions. He just wanted her to have a little more security, a little less fear. It was a small thing, but it was something he could do. He spent the next several days in Llano, ostensibly buying supplies and doing odd jobs for the locals. In reality, he was learning everything he could about Beatrice Ashford. He was not proud of it, but he asked around, gathered information, built a picture of her life. What he learned made his chest ache. She was utterly alone in the world, living hand to mouth, one bad week away from starvation or worse. The bruise on her wrist had come from the previous saloon owner, who had expected more from her than just singing. She had threatened to leave, and he had backed off, but then he sold the establishment to Crawford a month later. The debts she had inherited from her father were substantial, and men came around periodically demanding payment. She sang 5 nights a week at the saloon and took in mending during the day, working herself to exhaustion just to survive. Samuel found himself getting angry on her behalf, which was a new experience. He had not cared about anyone or anything in years, and now he was ready to fight the whole town for a girl he had known less than a week. It was ridiculous. It was dangerous. It was exactly the kind of emotional involvement he had fled to the mountains to avoid. But every evening, when he walked into the Golden Horse Saloon and heard her voice shake on the high notes, he knew he was already lost. On the sixth night, Beatrice invited him to dinner at her small house. She had used some of her extra earnings, Samuel's money that she did not know was Samuel's money, to buy chicken and vegetables for a proper meal. She cooked it on her small stove while he sat at the table and felt like an oversized bear in a doll's house. "I do not understand what is happening," Beatrice said as she stirred a pot. "Mr. Crawford suddenly decided to pay me more and the customers have been leaving me alone. Did you have something to do with that? Might have mentioned something to Crawford." "Samuel Fletcher, what did you do?" "Just made sure he understood that you deserved fair wages and respect, that is all." She turned to look at him, her wooden spoon still in her hand. "You threatened him, didn't you?" "Did not threaten, just clarified the situation." "Samuel, you cannot go around intimidating people on my behalf." "I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself." "Keep saying that. Evidence suggests otherwise." "That is not fair. You do not know what my life has been like, so tell me." She set down the spoon and leaned against the stove, her arms crossed. "My father was a gambler, a terrible one. When he died, I inherited nothing but debts and the clothes on my back. I sold everything we had, paid off what I could, and left Louisiana in the middle of the night because the men he owed money to were not interested in waiting for payment. I came to Texas because I thought I could start over, but it turns out that a woman alone has very few options in this world. What about your mother? She died when I was 12. It was always just me and my father after that. He loved me in his way, but he loved cards more. And whiskey. And the idea that the next hand would be the one that changed everything." Samuel could hear the old pain in her voice, the years of disappointment and struggle. He stood up from the table and crossed the small space between them, moving slowly so as not to frighten her. When he was close enough to smell the lavender soap she used, he stopped. "You deserve better," he said quietly. "Maybe, but this is what I have." "Does not have to be." She looked up at him, her brown eyes searching his face. "What are you saying, Samuel?" He did not know how to put it into words, this feeling that had been building in his chest for days. He was not a man who was good with emotions or declarations. He had lived alone for so long that he had almost forgotten how to be human. But something about this girl, with her trembling voice and her fierce determination to survive, had woken something in him that he thought had died years ago. "I am saying that you do not have to be alone anymore. I am saying that I know we have only known each other a week, and this is probably crazy, but I cannot stop thinking about you. I am saying that when I go back to my cabin in the mountains, I want you to come with me." Beatrice sucked in a sharp breath. "Samuel, you do not mean that. You barely know me. Know enough. Know you are brave and strong and determined. Know you have a voice that makes me feel things I have not felt in years. Know that I would rather spend one day with you than another year alone in the silence. This is insane. People do not just run off to the mountains together after a week. Why not? Because they do not. Because there are rules and propriety and all sorts of reasons why this is a terrible idea. Give me one good reason why you should not come with me." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I do not know you, not really. What if you are not who I think you are? What if you turn out to be cruel or violent or insane? Am not insane. Might be a little violent when the situation calls for it, but I would never, ever hurt you, B. I swear that on everything I hold sacred. How can I trust that? Cannot give you proof. Can only give you my word. And the fact that I am asking you, not telling you. If you say no, I will walk out that door and go back to my mountains and never bother you again. But if you say yes, I promise I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." Tears were running down her cheeks now, and Samuel fought the urge to wipe them away. "This is the most romantic and terrifying thing anyone has ever said to me. That a yes or a no." She laughed through her tears, that shaky, vulnerable sound he loved. "I must be completely out of my mind, but yes. Yes, Samuel Fletcher, I will come with you to your cabin in the mountains." He did kiss her then, unable to stop himself. It was not a practiced kiss or a particularly graceful one. Samuel had not kissed a woman in 8 years, and he was out of practice. But it was honest and full of feeling, and when Beatrice kissed him back, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, he felt something in his chest crack open and let in the light. They spent the rest of that evening making plans. Beatrice would give notice to Crawford, sell what few possessions she had that were worth anything, and settle her remaining debts. Samuel would use the money he had saved from years of trapping to pay off what she could not. They would leave Llano in 2 weeks, as soon as everything was arranged. Those 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity and stolen moments. Samuel worked odd jobs around town, using his strength to help ranchers mend fences and move cattle, earning extra money to make sure Beatrice was truly free of her obligations. Beatrice continued singing at the saloon, but now there was a lightness to her voice, a joy that had not been there before. The customers still did not appreciate her talent, but she did not care anymore. She was singing for Samuel, and for herself, and for the future they were building together. They spent every evening together, sometimes at her small house, sometimes walking the quiet streets of Llano under the stars. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and dreams. Samuel told her about the mountains, trying to prepare her for how different life would be. It would be hard work and isolation, months without seeing another soul. There would be no luxuries, no conveniences, just survival and each other. Beatrice listened to all of this with a determination that made Samuel's heart swell. She was not running to him out of desperation, though that was part of it. She was choosing him, choosing this life with her eyes wide open. She asked practical questions about food storage and winter preparations and how to skin a rabbit. She was already thinking of herself as a mountain woman, and Samuel loved her for it. He had not said those words out loud yet. Love. It felt too big, too dangerous to speak into existence. But he felt it growing inside him every day, every time he heard her voice or saw her smile or watched her face light up when he entered a room. On their last night in Llano, Beatrice gave her final performance at the Golden Horse Saloon. The place was packed, not because of her, but because it was Saturday and payday for the local ranches. Samuel stood at the bar as always, his eyes never leaving her face. When she began to sing, her voice shook less than it ever had before. She was still nervous, still vulnerable, but there was strength there too now. Strength and hope, and something that sounded a lot like happiness. She sang 3 songs that night, old folk tunes about love and loss and finding home. The crowd mostly ignored her, but Samuel heard every word, every note. When she finished and stepped off the stage for the last time, he was there waiting for her. "You are beautiful," he said. "My voice still shakes. I know. It is perfect." Crawford came over to pay her final wages, and there was grudging respect in his eyes. "You are really leaving with this mountain man, heading up into the hills to live like savages." "We are leaving," Beatrice confirmed. "And thank you for the opportunity to work here, Mr. Crawford." "You are making a mistake, girl. A pretty little thing like you could find a proper husband, have a proper life in town. This is the proper life for me." They walked out of the saloon together, Samuel's hand resting protectively on the small of Beatrice's back. The night air was cool and smelled of approaching summer. In the distance, Samuel could see the dark shapes of his mountains, waiting to welcome them home. The next morning, they loaded up Samuel's 2 horses with supplies and what few belongings Beatrice wanted to keep. She took one last look at the small house where she had struggled and survived for the past 2 years, then turned away without regret. Samuel helped her mount the smaller of the 2 horses, a gentle mare named Daisy, and swung himself up onto his larger stallion. "You ready for this?" he asked. "No," Beatrice said honestly, "but I am doing it anyway." They rode out of Llano as the sun was rising over the Texas hill country, the town growing smaller behind them with each step. Samuel led the way up winding trails into the mountains, paths that only someone who knew the terrain could follow. The higher they climbed, the cooler the air became and the more spectacular the views. Beatrice gasped when they crested a ridge and could see for miles in every direction, the rolling hills covered in juniper and oak, the sky an endless blue above them. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "Wait until you see the valley where my cabin is. Even better than this." They traveled for 2 days, stopping to camp at night in clearings Samuel had used before. He showed Beatrice how to build a proper fire, how to cook over open flames, how to tell direction by the stars. She was a quick learner, asking questions and practicing until she got it right. At night, they lay side by side in their bedrolls, not quite touching but close enough to feel each other's warmth. Samuel wanted to hold her, to kiss her again, but he held back. There would be time for that later when they were home and settled. On the afternoon of the second day, they arrived at Samuel's Valley. It was a small, hidden place, carved out between 2 peaks and fed by a cold, clear stream. The cabin sat at the edge of a meadow, a solid structure of logs and stone that Samuel had built during his first year in the mountains. There was a small barn for the horses, a smokehouse, and a covered area where he stored firewood. Beatrice slid down from Daisy's back and stood looking at the cabin, her expression unreadable. Samuel felt a sudden fear that she would hate it, that she would see the rough simplicity of his home and realize what a mistake she had made. The cabin had always been enough for him, but now, seeing it through her eyes, it looked crude and primitive. "Samuel," she said softly, "you built this yourself, every inch of it. Took me 6 months. It is wonderful." The relief that flooded through him was almost painful. "You really think so?" "I think it is the most wonderful place I have ever seen. I think you are the most wonderful man I have ever met. And I think I am the luckiest woman in the world right now." He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She fit there perfectly, her head tucked under his chin, her arms wrapped around his waist. "Going to do everything I can to make you happy here," he said into her hair. "I promise you that, Bea. I am already happy, Samuel, happier than I have been in years." They spent the rest of that day settling Beatrice into the cabin. It was a simple space, just one large room with a stone fireplace, a bed Samuel had made from pine logs and stuffed with dried grass, a rough table and chairs, and various shelves and pegs for storage. There was a loft above where Samuel kept his trapping supplies and extra furs. It was not much, but it was clean and solid and had kept him alive through 8 harsh winters. Beatrice moved through the space with growing confidence, already planning where she would put her few belongings and how she could improve the organization. She had brought fabric from town, planning to make proper curtains for the windows and maybe a tablecloth. Samuel watched her transform his bachelor cabin into a home and felt his chest tighten with emotion. That night, they had their first real meal together in the cabin. Samuel had shot a wild turkey during the journey, and Beatrice roasted it over the fireplace with wild onions and herbs. They ate at the small table, talking about plans for the coming days and weeks. Samuel would need to start his fall trapping soon, and Beatrice wanted to learn how. She also wanted to plant a garden in the meadow, to supplement their diet with vegetables and maybe some flowers. Flowers? Samuel asked, amused. Yes, flowers. Just because we are living in the wilderness does not mean we cannot have beautiful things. You are the only beautiful thing I need. She blushed at that, looking down at her plate. You are going to have to stop saying things like that, or I will never be able to look at you without blushing. Do not mind the blushing. Think it is pretty. After dinner, they sat together on the porch that ran along the front of the cabin. The sun was setting behind the western peak, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The valley was utterly silent except for the sound of the stream and the occasional call of a night bird. Samuel had his arm around Beatrice's shoulders, and she was leaning into him, her head resting against his chest. I used to be so afraid of silence, she said quietly. In town, there was always noise, always people. I thought the quiet up here would drive me mad. Does it? No, it is peaceful. I feel like I can finally hear myself think. Know what you mean. That is why I came here in the first place. Needed to get away from all the noise. What were you running from, Samuel? You have never really told me. He was quiet for a long moment, watching the colors fade from the sky. It was a fair question, and she deserved an answer. Was a soldier, he said finally. Fought in the Indian Wars, saw and did things that no man should have to see or do. When my enlistment was up, I could not go back to regular life. Could not be around people without feeling like I was about to explode. So I came here, where there was no one to hurt and no one to hurt me. That must have been so lonely, until I heard you sing. She turned in his arms to look up at him, her eyes shining in the fading light. I was so terrified that night. I had been singing at the saloon for months, and it never got easier. Every night I thought about quitting, about running away, but I had nowhere to run to. And then you were there, this enormous, terrifying man, and you looked at me like I was singing just for you. You were, did not know it yet, but you were. I think I fell a little bit in love with you that first night. Is that crazy? If it is, then we are both crazy, because I felt the same way. He kissed her then under the fading light, and it was different than their first kiss. This one was slower, deeper, full of promise and desire. Beatrice kissed him back with a passion that surprised him, her hands coming up to tangle in his long hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. We should probably talk about sleeping arrangements, he said, his voice rough. What about them? Well, there is only one bed. I can sleep in the loft if you want privacy, or you could sleep in the bed with me. I want to. You have no idea how much I want to. But I do not want to rush you, do not want you to feel pressured. She pulled back to look at him, her expression serious. Samuel Fletcher, I rode 2 days into the wilderness with a man I have known for 2 weeks. I left everything I knew to live in a cabin in the mountains. I am clearly not someone who moves slowly or plays it safe. I want to be with you in every way if you want that too. More than anything in the world. They went inside together, the cabin lit only by the fire in the hearth. Beatrice was trembling slightly, but Samuel knew it was not from fear. He undressed her slowly, treating her like something precious and fragile, which she was despite her strength. When they finally came together in the bed he had made with his own hands, it was with a tenderness that surprised them both. Afterwards, they lay tangled together under the quilts, Beatrice's head on Samuel's chest, his arms wrapped protectively around her. Through the window, they could see stars so bright and numerous that the sky looked white. I love you, Beatrice whispered into the darkness. I know it is too soon to say it, but I do. I love you, Samuel. I love you too, he said, the words coming easily now. Loved you from the first moment I heard you sing. Even though my voice shakes, especially because your voice shakes, That is how I know it is real." They fell asleep like that, holding each other in the mountain silence, and Samuel felt at peace for the first time in years. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Samuel's life. He taught Beatrice everything he knew about surviving in the wilderness, and she proved to be an apt student. She learned how to shoot his rifle, though the recoil knocked her backwards the first few times. She learned how to set traps for rabbits and squirrels, how to cure meat in the smokehouse, how to identify edible plants and avoid poisonous ones. She was not naturally outdoorsy, but she was determined and refused to give up even when things were difficult. Samuel, in turn, found himself softening under her influence. She brought laughter and music into his silent world. She sang while she worked, her voice still shaking but growing stronger with confidence. She told stories about her childhood in Louisiana, about her mother who had loved music and her father who had loved her despite his flaws. She made the cabin feel like a home instead of just a shelter. They established routines together. Samuel would rise before dawn to check his trap lines, and Beatrice would have coffee and breakfast waiting when he returned. They would work together during the day, her helping him with whatever needed doing, and he helping her with the garden she had planted in the meadow. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set, sometimes talking, sometimes just enjoying the silence together. The physical side of their relationship continued to deepen as well. Samuel had been worried that he would be too rough, too damaged by years of violence and isolation, but Beatrice met him with a passion that matched his own. She was not fragile, despite her small size and gentle nature. She was strong and fierce and unafraid to ask for what she wanted. They made love in the big pine bed, on the floor in front of the fire, once even in the meadow under the stars. Each time, Samuel marveled that this woman had chosen him, had given herself to him so completely. Summer turned to fall, and the mountains began to prepare for winter. Samuel knew from experience that they needed to work hard during these months to stockpile enough supplies to last through the harsh cold ahead. He increased his hunting and trapping, bringing home deer and elk that they butchered together and preserved. Beatrice proved surprisingly unfazed by the blood and gore, working alongside him with steady hands. One afternoon in late September, Samuel returned from checking his northern trap line to find Beatrice in the garden, pulling up the last of the vegetables before the first frost. She was singing while she worked, an old hymn her mother had taught her, and her voice carried across the meadow clear and strong. Samuel stopped to listen, his heart swelling with love and pride. Her voice still shook on some of the higher notes, but it was beautiful, perfect in its imperfection. When she saw him watching, she smiled and waved. "Samuel, come see how many potatoes we got, enough to last us through January at least." He crossed the meadow to where she knelt in the dirt, her dress muddy and her hair escaping from its pins. She looked nothing like the frightened saloon singer he had met in Llano 5 months ago. This woman was confident, capable, happy. He had done that, or at least helped her discover that version of herself. "You are incredible," he said, dropping to one knee beside her. "Do you know that? I am covered in dirt and probably smell like potatoes. Very romantic, Samuel. I mean it. Look at everything you have accomplished. This garden, learning to hunt and trap, making this place into a real home. I'm so proud of you, B." She set down the potato she was holding and threw her arms around his neck, kissing him soundly. "I could not have done any of it without you. You made me believe I could be more than I was. You were always more. Just needed the chance to show it." That night after dinner, Beatrice brought up a subject they had been dancing around for weeks. "Samuel, I have been thinking. We have been living together for months now, and while I do not regret a single moment of it, I think we should consider making things official." Samuel looked up from where he was cleaning his rifle. You mean getting married? Yes. I know it might seem silly since we are already living as husband and wife, but it is important to me. I want to be your wife in truth, not just in practice. Was not sure you would want that. Marriage means being trapped up here with me permanently. No going back to civilization. I do not want to go back to civilization. I want to stay here with you in our home for the rest of my life. But I want to do it properly, with vows and commitment. Samuel set down the rifle and crossed to where she sat by the fire. He took her hands in his, noticing how much smaller and more delicate they were compared to his own rough, scarred hands. Beatrice Ashford, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of letting me spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy? Yes, she said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The problem, of course, was that they were 2 days' ride from the nearest town and winter was coming fast. Samuel did not want to make the journey with snow threatening, and he especially did not want to risk Beatrice's safety. They discussed their options and decided to wait until spring to make it official with a preacher. In the meantime, they would consider themselves married in the eyes of God and each other. That night, they spoke their own vows to each other by the firelight. Samuel promised to love and protect Beatrice, to provide for her and cherish her, to be faithful and true for all his days. Beatrice promised to stand by Samuel through hardship and joy, to be his partner and companion, to love him without reservation. They sealed their promises with a kiss, and though there was no preacher present and no legal document signed, Samuel felt married in the truest sense of the word. Winter came to the mountains with a vengeance that year. Snow began falling in early November and did not stop until March. Samuel and Beatrice were snowed into the valley for weeks at a time, the passes too dangerous to attempt. But they had prepared well, and their supplies held out. The cabin stayed warm thanks to the stone fireplace, and the mountains of firewood Samuel had cut during the fall. Those long winter months were both challenging and beautiful. They were completely cut off from the outside world, just the two of them in their small cabin surrounded by snow and silence. There were days when the wind howled, and the cold was so intense that they stayed in bed wrapped in furs, holding each other for warmth. There were other days when the sun came out and the snow sparkled like diamonds, and they would bundle up and go outside to breathe the crisp air and marvel at the beauty. Beatrice continued to sing, her voice now the only human sound for miles besides their conversations. Samuel never tired of listening to her. She would sing while cooking, while mending clothes, while sitting by the fire in the evenings. She sang hymns and folk songs and ballads she had learned as a child. Her voice still shook sometimes, especially when she attempted new songs or particularly emotional pieces. But Samuel thought it was the most beautiful sound in the world. In late December, Beatrice had news that changed everything. She had been feeling ill in the mornings, tired during the days and crying at the smallest provocations. At first, they worried she was getting sick, but then Beatrice realized she had missed her monthly courses. She was pregnant. Samuel's reaction surprised even himself. He had never thought about being a father, had assumed his damaged soul was not meant for such domestic happiness. But when Beatrice told him, tears in her eyes and hope on her face, he felt joy unlike anything he had ever experienced. "We are going to have a baby," he said, the words not quite real yet. "You and me. Are you happy? I know we did not plan for this, and I know it will make things more difficult." Happy does not begin to cover it. I am thrilled, terrified but thrilled. He pulled her into his arms and held her close, feeling the slight swell of her belly where their child was growing. A baby. A family. Things he had never thought he would have or deserve. And now here they were, his and Beatrice's, a future stretching out before them. The rest of that winter was spent preparing for the baby's arrival. Samuel built a cradle from pine wood, carving it carefully and sanding it smooth so there would be no splinters to harm tender skin. Beatrice sewed baby clothes from soft fabric she had brought from Llano, her stitches tiny and precise. They talked endlessly about names and what kind of parents they wanted to be, and how they would protect this child in such a harsh environment. When spring finally came and the snow melted, Samuel made the journey to Llano to get supplies and find a preacher. He was gone for a week, the longest he and Beatrice had been apart since she came to the mountains. When he returned, he brought with him Reverend Thomas Wells, a circuit preacher who agreed to ride up to the valley to perform the marriage ceremony. They were married on a sunny April morning in the meadow behind the cabin, the wildflowers just beginning to bloom and the stream rushing with snowmelt. Reverend Wells performed a simple ceremony, and Samuel and Beatrice repeated the vows they had spoken to each other months before, this time making them official. Beatrice wore a new dress Samuel had purchased in town, simple but pretty, and wildflowers in her hair. Samuel had trimmed his beard and wore his cleanest buckskins. They looked nothing like a traditional bride and groom, but they were radiant with happiness. After the ceremony, Reverend Wells stayed for a meal and then headed back to Llano, leaving the newlyweds alone in their valley. That night, they celebrated their marriage the same way they had been celebrating their love for months, but with an added joy knowing they were now truly husband and wife. Summer brought new life to the valley, and to Beatrice as well. Her belly grew round with their child, and Samuel found himself constantly amazed by the changes in her body. He was protective to the point of being overbearing, not wanting her to lift anything heavy or work too hard. Beatrice tolerated his fussing with good humor, but she insisted on continuing her regular activities. She was pregnant, not fragile, she reminded him repeatedly. They spent the long summer days preparing for the baby's arrival in earnest. Samuel made multiple trips to Llano to trade furs for supplies they would need. He brought back fabric and thread, extra blankets, medical supplies in case there were complications with the birth. He also brought back a doctor who specialized in childbirth, paying the man handsomely to ride up to the valley and check on Beatrice. Dr. Hammond examined Beatrice and declared her healthy and strong. "Baby should come sometime in early September," he said. "Everything looks good. But you are very isolated up here. If there are complications during the birth, it will be difficult to get help." "We will be fine," Beatrice said firmly. "Samuel will take care of me, he always does." As her due date approached, Samuel grew increasingly anxious. He had faced down bears and hostile territory and survived brutal winters, but the thought of Beatrice in pain and him being unable to help her terrified him more than anything. He read the medical books he had purchased, memorizing what to do and what could go wrong. He set up the cabin with everything they might need within easy reach. He prayed, something he had not done in years, asking God to keep his wife and child safe. Their son was born on a cool September evening, arriving into the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the valley. Samuel helped deliver him, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he caught the slippery, squalling baby. Beatrice was exhausted and in pain, but she was also laughing and crying at the same time, reaching for their child with trembling hands. "A boy," Samuel said, his voice choked with emotion. "We have a son, Bea. Is he healthy? Let me see him." Samuel placed the baby on Beatrice's chest, and they both stared in wonder at the tiny human they had created. He had dark hair like his mother and what looked like his father's pale blue eyes. His little fists waved in the air, and his cries were strong and healthy. "He is perfect," Beatrice whispered. Absolutely perfect. They named him Thomas Samuel Fletcher, Thomas after the Reverend who had married them and Samuel after his father. Little Thomas was a good baby as babies went, though he kept them up at all hours with his needs. Samuel was surprisingly natural at fatherhood, taking shifts walking Thomas around the cabin when he was fussy, changing his nappies without complaint, singing awkward lullabies in his deep voice. Beatrice recovered well from the birth, though Samuel was overly protective for weeks afterwards. She teased him about treating her like glass, but secretly she loved his attentiveness. He was a good man, her mountain man, strong and protective but also capable of gentleness and deep feeling. The years that followed were filled with both challenges and joy. They raised Thomas in the valley, teaching him to walk and talk and eventually to help with chores. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth, who had her mother's brown eyes and sweet disposition. 3 years after that came another son, James, who was adventurous and wild from the moment he could crawl. Their cabin in the valley became a home filled with laughter and music. Beatrice sang to the children every day, teaching them the songs her mother had taught her. Her voice still shook on the high notes, but the children did not care. To them, their mother had the most beautiful voice in the world. Samuel still thought so too. He provided for his growing family through hunting and trapping, making trips to Llano twice a year to trade and gather supplies. As the children grew older, they started coming with him, learning the paths down the mountain and experiencing civilization in small doses. But they always preferred the valley, their home in the wilderness where they could run free and wild. Samuel and Beatrice's love continued to deepen over the years. They had their disagreements, of course, and there were hard times when money was tight or game was scarce or one of the children was sick. But they faced everything together, partners in the truest sense of the word. Samuel never stopped being amazed that this woman had chosen him, had left everything to live in his remote valley and raise their children in isolation. Beatrice never regretted her choice, not even on the hardest days. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel surprised Beatrice by taking her down to Llano for a few days. His parents had agreed to watch the children, which was a rare treat since visits with grandparents required a long journey. Samuel had saved money from his trapping to book them a room at the nicest hotel in town and take Beatrice to a proper restaurant. That evening, as they were finishing dinner, music started up in the hotel's saloon. Samuel took Beatrice's hand and led her to where a small crowd had gathered. Someone was playing piano and people were singing along to popular songs. "You ever miss it?" Samuel asked quietly. "Performing, being around people?" "No," Beatrice said firmly. "I have everything I need in our valley. You and the children, that is my whole world. But you love to sing." "I still sing every single day. For you and for the children, that is enough for me." But Samuel could see the wistful look in her eyes as she watched the performers. He squeezed her hand. "Sing something for me, right here, right now." "Samuel, I could not. All these people. They do not matter. Sing for me, Bea, like you do every day at home." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with love and trust. Then she turned to the crowd, cleared her throat, and began to sing. Her voice shook on the first few notes, rusty from nerves and lack of practice performing. But she kept going, singing an old ballad about love and home and finding where you belong. The crowd grew quiet, listening. When she finished, there was a moment of silence and then genuine applause. It was not the mocking laughter she had endured years ago, but real appreciation for her heartfelt performance. But Beatrice only had eyes for Samuel. "That was for you," she said softly. "It will always be for you." "I know," he said, pulling her close. "And it is still the sweetest sound I have ever heard." They returned to their valley the next day, eager to be back with their children and their life in the mountains. As they crested the final ridge and the valley came into view below them, both of them felt their hearts swell with contentment. This was home, this hidden place carved out of the wilderness. This was where they belonged. Years continued to pass in their familiar rhythms. The children grew tall and strong, learning the skills they needed to survive in the mountains. Thomas became an expert tracker and hunter, following in his father's footsteps. Elizabeth inherited her mother's love of music and could often be found singing while she worked. James was the adventurous one, always climbing higher and exploring further than he should. Samuel's hair turned gray at the temples, and his body bore the scars of decades of hard living. But he was still strong, still capable of the physical labor required to keep his family safe and fed. Beatrice aged gracefully, laugh lines forming around her eyes and mouth from years of smiling. Her voice still shook when she sang, but it was as sweet as ever to Samuel's ears. They added on to the cabin over the years, building extra rooms for the children and a larger kitchen. The garden expanded to include fruit trees and berry bushes. They acquired more livestock, including chickens and a milk cow. The valley became a true homestead, a thriving pocket of civilization in the wilderness. On quiet evenings, when the children were settled and the day's work was done, Samuel and Beatrice would sit on the porch just as they had done that first night so many years ago. They would hold hands and watch the sun set behind the western peak, comfortable in the silence that had once frightened Beatrice. Sometimes she would sing, her voice carrying across the valley. Sometimes they would just sit and be together, content in each other's presence. "You ever regret it?" Samuel asked one evening. "Giving up your life in town to come live up here with a rough old mountain man?" "Not for a single second," Beatrice said. "You saved me, Samuel, not just that night in the alley, but every day since. You showed me I could be more than I thought I was. You gave me love and family and a home. How could I ever regret that? I think you saved me too. Was lost up here, hiding from the world. You brought me back to life. We saved each other then. Suppose we did." As they sat there in the fading light, their grandchildren now starting to arrive for visits and their children building their own lives, Samuel reflected on how far they had come. From that first night when he heard her trembling voice in a crowded saloon to this moment of perfect peace, they had built something real and lasting. It had not always been easy, but it had always been worth it. "Sing for me," he asked softly. Beatrice smiled and began to sing, an old folk song about love enduring through hardship and time. Her voice shook on the high notes, just as it always had, and Samuel closed his eyes and listened. After more than 30 years together, it was still the sweetest sound he had ever heard. It was the sound of home, of love, of the life they had built together in their hidden valley. It was the sound of everything good in his world. And as the sun set behind the mountains and Beatrice's voice carried on the evening air, Samuel Fletcher knew he was the luckiest man alive. He had found his purpose in protecting and providing for this woman and the family they had created. He had found redemption in her love and healing in her presence. What had started as a chance encounter in a frontier saloon had become the greatest adventure of his life. The stars began to appear overhead, countless bright points in the darkening sky. Beatrice finished her song and leaned against Samuel's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys. The seasons would continue to turn. Their children and grandchildren would continue to grow, and they would continue to face it all together. But for now, in this perfect moment, there was nothing but peace and love and the mountain silence broken only by the sound of the stream and Beatrice's breathing. Samuel pressed a kiss to the top of her head and felt her smile against his chest. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he said. "Always have, always will." And there, in their valley, hidden away from the world, surrounded by the mountains Samuel had once fled to and the family he never thought he would have, they sat together and watched the night come. It was not the ending Samuel had imagined for himself all those years ago when he first retreated to the wilderness, broken and alone. It was so much better than anything he could have dreamed. It was home. It was family. It was love. And it was everything.